Jackie Miller, host of the Reconciling Ways of Knowing online forum series, joining you today from the territory of the Lekwungen Peoples, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich, where I'm grateful to be able to live, work, and study. Today's dialogue is the fifth in our online forum series that we've been organizing in response to COVID-19's impact on our plans to host an in-person forum this past May. For today's session, Reconciling Ways of Knowing is collaborating with the Victoria Forum. And we're grateful to be able to work with them on this event. They have a session going on for a half day today and a half day tomorrow on November 13th as well. Their theme for the forum is Bridging Divides in the Wake of the Pandemic, and we're pleased to join them today. Before we turn to the session itself, I have a few quick housekeeping notes. We've turned the chat feature off and will not be using the raise hands function, so ask that you use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen for your questions. We'll gather light questions together for the moderator and address all questions as time allows, so please submit your questions early. And please note that our speakers may have different Wi-Fi connections and volume levels based on their locations, and adjust your volume as needed. The session will run approximately an hour and a half. We're recording the dialogue so that anyone who's unable to participate in the entire session can view it later online. Our moderator for today is Darren Ma. Darren Ma is an associate lawyer practicing in the areas of Aboriginal and Indigenous law at Munnings Law in West Vancouver, BC. Prior to joining Munnings Law, Darren managed the National Consortium for Indigenous Economic Development at the University of Victoria and served as a business instructor through the Northwest Aboriginal Canadian Entrepreneurs Program in collaboration with the University of Victoria. I'm also very pleased to work very closely with Darren as a lead organizer in the Reconciling Ways of Knowing Indigenous Knowledge and Science project, working to bring the vision and objectives of its advisory planning committee to life. Now over to you, Darren. Darren, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and good day and welcome to everyone. I'm Darren Ma, and I'll be the moderator for today's Reconciling Ways of Knowing dialogue, Millennia of Experience, drawing on Indigenous knowledge in responding to COVID-19. I'm joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver, British Columbia. I would like to thank Jackie and our support team, the conveners, and our guests today for sharing their time and wisdom with us. Before we begin today's dialogue, I would like to invite Grandmother Catherine Whitecloud to say a few words and open today's session in a good way.
Thank you very much, Darren and Jackie. Good morning to everybody, or afternoon, wherever you may be located. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today. I'm grateful for the blessings of our Creator in giving us another day to live and do good things for our people, especially for our grandchildren and those yet unborn. And the conversations that we're having here today are so very, very relevant for the future of our children and for the future of Mother Earth in general. And so I had offered a prayer this morning when I rose. So I would just like to share with you that I gave thanks for the blessings of today, for life, for the blessings of our children, and for all of the blessings that Mother Nature and our Mother, the Earth, provides for us. And so with those good words this morning and the prayer that I offered up, in offering and asking for guidance for today and having pity on us as the Ikjawi Chashta, that the Creator give us blessings for today. So I appreciate the opportunity, Darren, to share that.
Thank you very much, Grandmother Whitecloud, for those powerful words and helping us open this day in a great way. I'm now honored to introduce our speakers of today's session. Elder Dr. Dave Christian Jr. has touched many lives through his teachings. He is respected elder and knowledge keeper of the Anishinaabe Nation. He has devoted his life to creating a healthy environment for current and future generations, carrying messages of hope and peace around the globe. Elder Crochane founded the Turtle Lodge International Center for Indigenous Education and Wellness, a partner in the Reconciling Ways of Knowing Indigenous Knowledge and Science project. Miles Richardson is a citizen of the Haida Nation and a member of the Order of Canada. Miles served as the youngest president of the Council of the Haida Nation from 1984 to 1996. He led the drafting of the Constitution of the Haida Nation, developing the first comprehensive Haida Nation land and marine use plan enacted under Haida law, and negotiated the Guai-Harness Agreement, the first nation-to-nation agreement between the Haida Nation and Canada. Tom Swanky was born in Quesnel, British Columbia, in the territory of the Chilcotin. At the invitation of several Chilcotin leaders, Tom learned more about their history and spent 6 years reviewing the primary written record. Under the guidance of Chilcotin knowledge keeper Ivor Myers, Tom published his book, The Great Darkening, covering the Chilcotin War from the Indigenous perspective and providing an overview of how smallpox was spread throughout the North Pacific colonies during 1862. Dr. Sabina Ijaz is a primary care physician who has also worked in emergency rooms and as a hospitalist in Indigenous communities in Manitoba over the last 20 years. For 30 years, he has also worked closely with the Turtle Lodge International Center for Indigenous Education and Wellness and a national group of Indigenous knowledge keepers on numerous Indigenous-led health, education, justice, and climate initiatives in community. Grandmother Catherine Whitecloud is a community leader and knowledge keeper for the Wapozek Wakpa Dakota Nation. She has worked for her community in several roles, including as Chief and Director of Education, and with a focus on Indigenous health and wellness. She was also Chief Executive Officer of the Assembly of First Nations, Director of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and Manitoba Regional Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. To start today's dialogue, I would like to invite Dr. Sabina Ijaz to speak a little bit about her insights as a medical doctor on how Indigenous people have been impacted by and been resilient to COVID-19. Specifically, if you're able to comment on the Indigenous Services Canada report that spoke to Indigenous communities having approximately 25% of the transmission rate and 20% of the mortality rate of the general population, and some of your insights into why that may be.
Good morning. Thank you, Grandmother Whitecloud, for the prayer this morning. Thanks, Darren, for the question. Just 1 second here. I believe Indigenous communities have the potential to be highly resilient in the long term, as well as bring great insights when we look to Indigenous knowledge keepers for answers. Indigenous people have a history of leading in their homeland for tens of thousands of years, evolving with a knowledge that could help save our species from extinction, never mind COVID-19. It is time for Indigenous peoples to lead again. It's too early to say with any certainty that Indigenous peoples are experiencing lesser impacts of COVID-19 as we're just beginning the second wave. We were, of course, all celebrating in Manitoba when there were 0 cases in First Nation communities over the summer, which may have been partly due to lockdowns and diligent social isolation practices on reserve. But since the second wave has begun, the number of Indigenous people hospitalized with COVID in our province has surged. Indigenous patients currently represent 69% of those in the ICU and 26% of those hospitalized, despite representing 18% of the population. The root of what we're seeing with higher than national average rates of chronic disease and mental health issues in Indigenous nations are symptoms of genocide and colonization. A disconnection from the earth and a kind and spiritual way of life once lived, historical and ongoing trauma, assimilation, and racism play a huge role in the symptoms we see. Other social determinants of health, including overcrowded housing, income insecurity, and access to clean drinking water, all play a role. Indirect effects of COVID-19 must also be considered in our metrics. The costs of social isolation are being felt broadly in our emergency rooms and inside Indigenous communities, with huge surges in overdoses, mental health issues, addictions, and domestic violence. More people are dying nationally from opiate overdoses than COVID-19. In BC, Indigenous overdose deaths almost doubled from January to May, representing 5.6 times the rate of other BC residents in that time period. Are we measuring effects on quality of life of families when children are separated from their grandparents? Are we considering the value of elders, who culturally, along with children, are the most valued members of Indigenous societies when making end-of-life decisions in our overburdened ICUs? In addition to working as a medical doctor in Indigenous communities in Manitoba for almost 20 years, Indigenous knowledge keepers nationally have been my colleagues, teachers, and partners on Indigenous-led initiatives in health, climate change, education, and justice for the last 30 years. The National Turtle Lodge Knowledge Keepers Council has recently been engaged by the federal government to help build back better after COVID-19. Sharing their perspectives on what an Indigenous-led health system could look like for this country. These are highly esteemed and respected Indigenous elders and leaders, grounded in their communities, rooted in their ancestral ceremonies, teachings, and traditions. They are fluent in their original languages and in relationship with the land. They are individuals who've worked and studied a lifetime in the ceremonies and with their elders, earning the knowledge they now share willingly with young people from many cultures. When Indigenous knowledge keepers are positioned as leaders with influence, the solutions to society's ills can be found and implemented, sometimes working in partnership with Western approaches, as was highlighted in our recent Canadian Medical Association Journal article, Indigenous-led Healthcare Partnerships in Canada. Kigagamic Traditional Healing Center and First Nation Health Authority is an example of an Indigenous knowledge keeper-led health partnership by 4 First Nation communities initiated by Turtle Lodge at our local Pine Falls Hospital. Knowledge keepers have helped me understand the true reasons for illness and take a holistic approach to seeking and addressing the root of disease, an imbalance in our relationships with spirit and nature. As doctors, we can talk until we're blue in the face to a person with diabetes about lifestyle and being compliant with medication. It can be difficult to get up off the couch to exercise, to choose foods that are healing rather than self-medicating. If one's spirit is low, if one is feeling depressed, if one does not have a vision or purpose in life to motivate. Indigenous healers and knowledge keepers are gifted in addressing our hurting spirit, the true root of the disease, through time-tested practices of counseling, healing ceremonies, and land-based practices. They can help lift our spirit. When we look at evidence-based Western medicine as it is practiced today with pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, and surgical interventions, it is actually quite young, only about 100 years old. Dr. Cynthia Lindquist of the University of North Dakota shares that more than 80% of the drugs currently in use today are derived from medicines taught by Indigenous peoples to settlers who arrived on the shores of North America within the last 500 years. These natural medicines were chemically analyzed for their active ingredients, then artificially replicated in labs. In this process, as knowledge keepers have shared with me, the true value of the medicine was lost. These medicines from the land, like the land itself, are alive. There is a spiritual process of engagement with a medicine that has the most impact on healing. Western medicine has long been accused of simply addressing symptoms, putting on band-aids which, while good in emergencies, do little to address chronic disease, mental health, and surprises like COVID-19, which have turned our entire world upside down. The double-blinded randomized controlled trial, the main check of evidence-based medicine we're taught to follow in medical circles, is best suited for analyzing drugs. Current standards of medical research and education are very dismissive of more qualitative approaches that are more suited for understanding holistic methods. What was once touted as the soft sciences may in fact be of more value today as we realize the significance of a connection with one's personal journey, sense of identity and purpose, the values that one practices, and one's connection to the spiritual reality and natural world. Science also faces a great conundrum when it attempts to evaluate spiritual faith and belief objectively when approaching those, such as the Indigenous, who are confidently operating within a spiritual context. How do you evaluate with seeing is believing when believing is seeing? Indigenous knowledge keepers can help us put together the pieces of knowledge from nature about life, giving meaning and understanding to our greater purpose as human beings living on this planet. Through their understanding of natural law, Indigenous knowledge keepers can set a holistic foundation for wellness, leading the path forward within which the more limited Western medical system can operate. It cannot work the other way around, trying to indigenize or plug Indigenous knowledge into the tiny reductionist frameworks of science. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that perspective, Sabina. I think it's a great way to frame today's conversation. Next, I would like to invite Grandmother White Cloud to speak a little bit about her work with Indigenous health approaches and Indigenous health governance, and also just how the broader thinking approaches can be drawn upon to improve health outcomes of everyone. My understanding is that you won't be able to stay for the whole day, so we thank you very much for being able to join us.
Thank you very much, Darren, and thank you, Sabina, for those words and for the background you provided, and for sharing your knowledge and your experience with Indigenous health approaches versus the mainstream Western approach to medicine and well-being. First of all, as knowledge keepers and my colleagues, and when we sit together, we don't talk about hospitals and we don't talk about prescription medications. We talk about what it means to be well and what does that mean to us. For us, our well-being is all encompassing, and the very basis for it in the what provides us with our well-being is being spiritually grounded. What is well-being? And what does being spiritually grounded mean for us? It means living with our language. It means speaking our language. It means being in balance with Mother Earth. It's all about living in balance with what is provided to us, which is a gift of life. What's really at the heart of where we find ourselves today, as articulated by Sabina, is that man has decided that they are in control when in fact man has no control whatsoever for what nature has to provide for us, or for the things that come and challenge us, like where we find ourselves today with COVID. When we allow ourselves for ego to lead a process or to lead our lives, we find ourselves imbalanced. And so through experience and through the knowledge of walking through life with the teachings provided by my ancestors, my mother, my father, aunties, grandmother, great-grandmother, I've learned both sides, the Western world and the traditional way. And what I find that has been the most beneficial, not just for myself, but for my family, is understanding that the traditional knowledge and the traditional ways that were passed down to us by our ancestors are actually what provides us and feeds us and gives us strength and provides us with that spiritual well-being and that spiritual grounding, as well as the spiritual strength to be able to manage the challenges that come. In addition to that, we have a powerful faith in the power of our prayer and our relationship with our Creator, and also the relationship with our original mother, Mother Earth. We still maintain that she provides for us, and she is a kind and loving mother that will take care of those needs for us to live in a good and healthy way. And so we give thanks for that each time we have a drink of water, each time we eat, we give thanks. That doesn't come from something that we've done. It's come from Mother providing for us. And for that, we're always grateful. It's a very simple approach to life. It's not a difficult approach to life. What compromises a simple way of living and living with love and caring and compassion and supporting and helping each other as families and as good relatives to provide the supports for well-being and living in a good way has been lost to great extent by adopting Western ways that have been so detrimental to our communities. A simple thing like living in family groupings has been torn apart. Supporting each other as families when you're so far apart becomes difficult. The medicines that are provided to us by the earth are the ones that actually heal us, because our bodies feel it the most as Indigenous peoples. Mother's imbalance. She feels, and we feel it the most, that things are not well with Mother Earth. And therefore, our constant call for, we have to take care of her, because that is where we get our strength and our energy and our well-being from. During this era of COVID and the challenges that all of our people are facing, we've gone back to our ceremonial lodges. We've gone back to our ceremonies of where we've always been, but we've gone and asked for direction. How do we take care of this? How do we take care of our people during this challenging time? We've been given direction what we need to do. Our responsibility is to follow that direction that's been provided to us. We're fortunate. We still have those traditional medicines. We still have those teas that we drink that help build our immune system, that protect us and carry us during this time. It is much more healthy and balanced to take that than it is to take prescription meds after the fact. Western medicine tends to treat the symptom, not the root of what is causing that. And our approach, and has always been our approach, is that we take care of things right from the beginning of life so that we can live a good and healthy life. We don't take care of things after the fact to try to take care of illnesses. So that is the approach we're taking. And for the most part, all people, all our Indigenous people also have this understanding and also have these ways and have medicines from their territories that they grew up with that supports them and balances them and keeps them healthy. And the answer again is very simple. Go back to our old ways. It's as what has sustained us ever since we were put here on this earth by our Creator, and the Mother Earth will take care of us. We have to do our part in taking care of her so we can live a fulfilled, healthy life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grandmother White Cloud. Just the way you're speaking about that importance of balance and doing things in the traditional way is very, very important in this conversation. So next, I'd like to turn to Tom Swanky to speak a bit about how Indigenous communities have encountered and worked with similar pandemics in the past and that area of research. So Tom, if you could maybe just share a little bit with us about your experience working with Indigenous knowledge keepers and learning about the oral histories. You know, tell us what the Indigenous experience with smallpox and how that may have influenced the responses we're seeing from Indigenous communities currently during COVID-19.
Thank you, Darren. I use the smallpox epidemics of 1862 as a point of reference for what I say. And I've been struck by how similar the reactions of Native communities were in 1862 to what we're doing today. For example, when someone became ill in a village, they would go to a small shelter on the outskirts, and people would bring food and water and leave it some feet away. This is a form of social distancing or quarantine. When a disease would break out in a community, some households would leave the community and they'd locate themselves in remote camps. This is another form of quarantine and social distancing. And we also had face coverings. There are stories of when people were dealing with bodies or with circumstances where there were several ill people. They would cover their faces with scarves or with masks in the form of handkerchiefs, and they would soak those in alcohol. Typically, it would be whiskey. So they used face coverings. There's the story of a settler Gibbs who, as he approached a village, he was stopped, and a village healer gave him a inspection to see whether he was diseased, looked in his mouth for a rash and other kinds of muscle weaknesses, other signs that he would be diseased before he was allowed to go in the village. That's the same today. We stop people at the airport and we find out whether they're diseased. And then rather than handling bodies and handling diseased material, they would, as much as possible, they would burn this material if they knew that it was diseased. Now, in addition to those things, in 1862, natives went for vaccinations. There are stories of natives traveling as far as 300 miles in order to become vaccinated. Missionaries vaccinated thousands of natives during 1862, and they didn't report any resistance to the process. There are stories where rather than being vaccinated, some people went to remote camps. Now, when we look at the smallpox epidemic of 1862, and we look at how Native elders and knowledge keepers teach British Columbia history in terms of this event, which was described in some Native traditions as similar to the, in effect, the Great Floods. 90% of the Haida, of the Chilcotin and Newhawk died in this epidemic. 60 to 100,000 natives may have died between May of 1862 and March of 1863. And the elders teach this, and they say that settlers spread the disease intentionally on this occasion. And when we look at the record, we see that most of these cases are inoculation epidemics. And inoculation is a procedure that's similar to vaccination. Only the doctor knows whether you're being vaccinated in inoculation. Inoculation was an illegal procedure in 1862. It had been outlawed in 1840 because of its public health dangers. The most dramatic instances in British Columbia of what appear to be inoculation epidemics were the 500 natives that Dr. Helmken was supposed to have vaccinated at Victoria. And the newspapers started reporting shortly afterward that these people came down with the disease. Up the coast, the Wekino said that they went to buy vaccine material, and the material that was sold to them gave them the disease. So these are signs of inoculation epidemics. And for our purposes, what this shows is that Native communities learned that they had to take local control of disease measures. It may have been that people that were approaching their communities couldn't be trusted, but it also could be that other people outside authorities and outsiders don't know what the proper priorities are for controlling diseases within their villages. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Tom. I think that helps us really put this conversation in context, understanding the history behind it and how that may have, how it has influences on what we're seeing today. On that note, I'd like to turn to Miles Richardson. So Miles has, been a political leader in Indigenous communities for a long time, and I know he is, been a consistent advocate for nation building. So Miles, I'm hoping you might be able to share with us a little bit about the importance of that sovereignty and nation building and sort of asserting your jurisdiction in the responses that we've seen to COVID-19 and how you think that may have impacted some of these results that we are seeing in Indigenous communities and how the impacts are being felt.
Thank you, Darren. And Hawa, thank you to Grandmother White Cloud in my language, Catherine, that would be Nanai White Cloud. Hawa, thank you for starting off with a prayer and reminding us of doing all that we do in proper ceremony, especially the discussions that we're having today. When I think of pandemics and the information that Sabina and Dr. and Mr. Swanky have put in front of us from those experiences, it reminds me of how important it is for us to remember our story, to learn and remember our stories, and to always remain in control of our own well-being, of our own health and destiny. You know, when we talk about nationhood, sovereignty and jurisdiction, it's every bit as important in areas such as this. And I think our people's history leading up to how we've dealt with today's COVID-19 pandemic would help us to appreciate that. This morning, listening to everyone's presentation, what's come really strong to me is one of my elders in the Haida Nation in Skidegate, a man named Paul Smith. He was an elder who first persuaded me to run as a political leader for the Haida Nation. He was a traditional person, very steeped in our culture, but also very Christian. You know, a lot of my elders in my community were very Christian, and that, in looking at that, it was as much as anything a response to dealing with that pandemic in the 1800s that Tom Swanky talks about, that wiped out 90% of our people. Then the missionaries came and told our people about this righteous way of knowing, this right way of knowing. But our people, the Haida people, were very sure of who we are and our way of knowing. So even when this different way of knowing, this Christianity, this way of being was brought to them, they looked at it in a way of what I would say, as Grandmother Whitecloud reminds us, they looked at it in a loving way. They looked for commonalities. They saw this way of thinking as and the Bible behind it as a manifesto for loving relationships, because they believed in that. That's what they believed. And when this religion was brought to them, that's what they saw and that's what they looked for in it. And as they lived their lives, they looked for commonalities with our traditional way of believing and this way that was brought to them as a righteous way. And they found a way forward, a good way forward in recognizing our common humanity and our responsibilities as human beings in our places. They found a place for that in that religion. And I think that's an important reason why we made it through those challenges. And it's good guidance. It sheds light, I think, on what we as humanity are going to have to come to terms with in finding our way forward. In this pandemic, the Haida Nation kept control over kept authority over the collective well-being of our people, even though other jurisdictions, call it federal and provincial, didn't formally recognize that authority. They recognized that we took that position and they worked with us to cooperate and work together in making decisions of how we react to and deal with this pandemic. And to our people, because of our situation today, paramount in dealing with this pandemic was protecting our elders. If we were in protecting our elders, we were protecting our communities and our nations. Our elders were the most vulnerable to this bug, this virus. And it just so happens that at this point in time, in the wake of the smallpox epidemics and such, that we've lost a lot of our cultural teachings, we've lost a lot of our language and stuff, and our elders are fighting vigorously to bring those back. And we need, and it's down to, 20 people in each community that we need to protect, and all of our effort was put into protecting them. And we cooperated with other governments as much as we could. But when it came right down to it, we accepted full responsibility for the well-being and faith of our people. And that's the way it must be. And when you look at different practices, we use the same thing, and as our people have done throughout millennia. 10 years ago, a Kwagyoth leader, Bo Dick, held a potlatch in Fort Rupert, and between the Haida Nation and Kwakwala speaking peoples. And he was remembering, he wanted us all, this generation and future generations, to remember a time during those smallpox epidemics of the 1860 that Tom Swanky is reminding us and telling us the story of, that every year, every spring, the Haidas used to go down in hundreds of canoes down to Victoria, down to the trading post, the Hudson Bay post in the Inner Harbor. Haidaville, the Esquimalt and Songhees people always remind me when I'm down there, the Haida camp was where the Empress Hotel is today. And the Haidas would go down there, and this one year, Bo Dick's grandfather was informed by a preacher, his name was Dawson, he said, that when the Haidas are in Victoria this year, they're going to be infected with smallpox. They're going to be given smallpox infected blankets, and be careful, Fort Rupert people, when they come back, because they're going to be sick and they'll pass this on to you. This is before they even went down. So sure enough, when the Haidas came back from Victoria, they were sick and weak, and the Kwagyoth people had set up a camp, and today they call it Bones Bay. They'd set up camps, firewood, and all that so they could live, but they quarantined themselves from the Haidas, but still protected them and helped them. And this potlatch, which took place 10 years ago by Bo Dick and the Kwagyoth and Haida people, was to remind us of those relationships, of those histories, and our ability to work together to deal with pandemics such as this. Because that wasn't the first, this wasn't the first one, and it won't be the last. And if you look at one reason why we're still here after all these millennia, that is one of the reasons. I thank you all for being on this morning and sharing what you're sharing. And Tom Swanky, I think the elder I speak of, you fulfilled one of his unfilled life ambitions. He always, Paul Smith always used to tell me that smallpox epidemic was real. It was brought to us, and nobody tells that story. He said, I'm gonna write a book about it. I'm gonna tell that story. And he died before he could, but you're honoring his memory. Hoa.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Miles. It's always great to see the enthusiasm you bring to these conversations, and it's really important to be cognizant of everything you speak about as we move forward with this. So lastly, I would like to invite Elder Dr. Dave Crishane to speak with us a little bit today about the importance of ceremony and that need to work together and come together as Indigenous people and Canada together sort of work their way through this pandemic. Dave, if you would share that with us, would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much, Darren. Bujoanin. Chibo abjit to one anin is gig to twin stigo. The abjit on the skin, Gagizimini, and Snaberia. Yimina and Abekregego. Anin gave it Chip Madis, Anin gave it. Nogum the skin, abjit on. Manin Kagi mini goes, yeah. Yeah. Chikskit the wang, chewit page, Minik, Gagi, Ikanama goes at the Stigegoksha, Oyagakskit, Jabajit tot, me way hunting Nitam, Nishnabe Anina, Ani gave in Chigigitat, Jinsutang me way, Gagi mini goes at the Nishnabe, me way Mino Pimadis even. Good morning, my relatives. You know, I always take the opportunity to be able to use my language because language is what connects us to the spirit, and language is what connects us to our ancestors. Language reflects the truth of our identity as a people. And certainly what we are living through as a people is in more recent times, we were not allowed to be able to speak our language. We were not allowed to live our way of life. And it's been in more recent times that, as it's been referred to, that the knowledge keepers have stepped forward to be able to fill their duty and responsibility in being the teachers of a way of life. Let me begin by sharing my understanding of what I believe has caused our current reality of the pandemic, and certainly the issue of climate change. As a people, we have been watching with a deep concern the mistreatment and the disrespect of the land. This has to change if we're going to survive. The pandemic is a symptom of what we have done to nature. Today, we live with the impacts of our disrespect towards Mother Earth. We are challenged to go to the root of the problem rather than only the symptoms. The environment has to be healthy if we are going to be healthy. The virus is a message, nature's call to wake up. Mother Earth has an intelligence and great love for all of us as her children. When we go astray, she does her best to correct us. Natural law states that what we put into our circle always returns to us in some way. We are all being held accountable for what we have done to the earth. It was inevitable that nature would release something that would bring us back to a standstill. All of our problems arise from our loss of values, our lack of caring, our disconnection from the land, and the loss of a spiritual way of life. As Indigenous peoples, we have survived with a strong memory of the original instructions on how to return the love received from the land. This is essential for not only our health and well-being, but our survival. Being on the land strengthens our spirit. And as we become in alignment with nature, our immune system and overall health is also strengthened. When we are in rhythm with the land, we become one with the land. We need to relearn to have faith and trust that the earth will provide our survival. As a people, we have been denied access to the earth through colonization, which has impacted our ability to carry out our ancestral responsibilities. As Indigenous people of this land, it is our responsibility to take a prominent role reflecting our leadership that is guided by the knowledge keepers. Our knowledge keepers who speak our original languages and who are rooted in the ceremonies and teachings of our people carry the sacred knowledge which is embedded in the spirit of the land. The knowledge keepers hold a vision of hope and direction that is rooted in love for all humanity. This vision can help to unite us in a common concern of taking better care of the earth, which can help us to move forward beyond this pandemic and climate change to a brighter future. This will require a journey to the land so we can feel the spirit, so we can feel the love the land has for all of us. In our leadership, whatever we do it for the love that we have for all of creation. The land can help to remove the fears that have been brought on by this virus. As much as this virus has brought change and many challenges, it has also brought great opportunity to unite in our efforts to put us on the right path of loving the earth again. Being on the land can provide us great comfort. The elders say, go back to the beginning. The spirit is the beginning of everything, and we must follow the spirit which works within each of us. Only the spirit and the land can liberate our minds and open our hearts. Miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. I think that's very useful as we move forward in this conversation that's going to happen, not only in today's dialogue, but just as we build forward from this. Right now, I'd just like quickly to let people know that Grandmother White Cloud has had to leave for another commitment, but we'd like to thank her very much for her participation. And now I'd like to start some dialogue amongst the speakers. So the first question I have really is for Sabina. So you speak about a lot of the Indigenous-led health and wellness programs that you and Grandmother White Cloud have worked with. What do you think is needed in action for from Canada, from provincial governments, territorial governments, the federal government to support these types of initiatives? Is it a matter of funding, or is it a matter of just opening our minds and listening to the knowledge that's already out there? If you could maybe expand a little bit on that, would be nice.
Thank you, Darren. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
First of all, I think that Indigenous leadership needs to be incorporated at a federal level. I'm not talking about politically or as part of government, rather like as a partnership. If we look at, what the original intent and spirit of the nation to nation relationship is supposed to look like, but not in a political way. I see it more as not a political leadership or a dominating style of leadership, rather a moral and ethical leadership where the Indigenous knowledge keepers are best positioned as leaders of this country in offering guidance and direction to the politicians and setting a foundation of values and a code of conduct and how we are to live and behave on their homeland. Once they're positioned in this leadership, I believe things will begin to flow naturally. The knowledge that Indigenous knowledge keepers hold around natural healing practices are very important. You know, these practices are directly connected to the relationship with the land. There's, as Elder Kershane just said, there's an understanding that if the earth or the environment is not healthy, we're not going to be healthy. And so taking care of the earth is very much a part of taking care of our own health. You might have heard the Indigenous saying expressed by many nations, we are all connected and related. And there is, you know, there is a really pioneering initiative we're just working on right now at the Turtle Lodge with the federal government. And it's really pioneering and exciting in terms of the federal government being open and showing respect for the Indigenous knowledge keepers and their perspectives. The knowledge keepers from the Turtle Lodge International Center for Indigenous Education and Wellness are coming in as an independent national group of knowledge keepers from Indigenous nations across this country who are rooted in their communities, the land, their ceremonies, original languages, teachings, and traditions. And they're taking the lead in terms of bringing their perspectives together, as well as engaging doctors and others who they feel can create effective wellness approaches for this country working together. And along, you know, this is the first time something like this has happened here to my knowledge, and I'm so excited about it. This will be a learning process, I'm sure, for everyone. And I really give credit to FINIB, the First Nations Inuit Health Branch, and Indigenous Services Canada for the faith that they have in the knowledge keepers. They have seconded somebody from their office to work with us at the Turtle Lodge over the next 2 years to ensure that the relationship is honored and respected. And I really have to say, not one of us alone, whether it be Indigenous knowledge keepers or Western doctors, has all the answers to good health. But the important thing is we're now working together.
That is great, Sabina. And that actually leads to another question that we have. So for Elder Kershane, could you maybe build a little bit upon some of the efforts that the Turtle Lodge has currently, convened, whether it's, convening elders, and just sort of what support can be provided for that?
Let me first of all, try to give some quick explanation of the work that we are engaged in at the Turtle Lodge. The lodge itself, came through a vision that helped us to have a place where we can restore so much that has been taken away. And most of the work that we have been doing is to try to bring, the teachings and the gifts that were given to us as a people, and to remind our own people of, what a beautiful people that we are, that our great Creator had given us everything that we needed in order to live and to survive. And we were told within the lodges, we were given 2 unique gifts that we would hold as we sit in the direction of the east, which is the direction of vision, which is the direction of leadership. And we were given, this gift of spirit to have an understanding of the significance of that spirit, in our life. And also we were given the gift of what is referred to as the land, Mother Earth. And it is our people that evolved over tens of thousands of years, reflecting protocols that honored and respected the earth. So at the lodge, we've been very, very fortunate in being able to be in this environment now that we're able to practice, our way of life in a much more spirit of freedom. Because it wasn't that long ago that we were prevented by legislation, even though we still are challenged by probably the most racist legislation that anyone can live under, called the Indian Act. And we continue to be challenged to try to live the spirit of that freedom within our own identity, knowing that legislation, is over our heads. But we remain optimistic that one day that we will find, our rightful place in our homeland, to exercise, our leadership in our homeland. When it comes to reaching out to other peoples, I approach it on the basis that that we all have a shared responsibility here, and for us as a people, our responsibility is to live our identity as a people. And I think for all those that have arrived on our homeland, I would encourage those, that are listening that, you have a shared responsibility to restore and bring back what was taken away. Because, the current reality is that you have the original people, sitting at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder in this country where poverty is very prevalent in our communities. And that's a way of life we never chose, to be in poverty and to be denied access to the land itself, where we always have depended upon to survive. So we have a great challenge, to try to find ways to be able to work together. It has always been, in the spirit of unity that the elders and the knowledge keepers have always taken a vision of being inclusive to everyone. And it is really well understood by the knowledge keepers, that we're all on the same boat now. And we're going to have to find a way to be able to ride the storm that we're in. And what I would hope for that one day soon, that we are given the right to steer that boat for a while, that have trust and faith in the people, that have that knowledge that will guide us, beyond what has brought us into this reality. So we do a lot of work primarily in our understanding of spirit and our connection to the land.
Great, thank you very much, Elder Crochet. Our next question is for Tom. So you shared a lot about just how horrible the beginnings of the relationship between Indigenous people and the Canadian government were during smallpox. Where do you see that relationship standing right now? And is there an opportunity in the current pandemic to help build that relationship? Tom, I think you're muted.
That's an interesting question, and what was going through my mind actually is there's a question here that Miles Richardson can answer somewhat better in terms of what the COVID experience is teaching us. Now, we know in the smallpox epidemics that there were 2 cases of emergencies declared, false emergencies, and those regimes, the emergencies, were used in order to disadvantage the Indigenous people. But what was going through my mind was that in Chilcotin territory, we have a case where there are settlers who are living on Chilcotin Aboriginal title land. And one of the promises that colonization makes to people who come here, to immigrants, to people who come to live in colonies, is that they won't be subjected to Indigenous rules. And so I was wondering whether Miles had some reflections on the experience of the Haida, and this same experience was experienced by the Newhawk and the Chilcotin, who instituted measures to protect their communities, about whether the people who live beside them, who are not Haida, how they reacted to the assertion of jurisdiction by the Haida and the similar jurisdictions by the Newhawk, the Chilcotin, and other First Nations. So that's what was running through my mind, and I was it's not so much the governments, it's the response of the surrounding community, because the governments eventually are led by how the community responds, and so it's very important how the community responded to the efforts taken by the Haida and others to protect their communities.
Thank you for that, Tom. So Miles, would you like to sort of build upon what Tom is speaking to there? I think having that perspective would be very helpful in this dialogue.
That's a really important question, Tom, and I'm happy to address it. In the epidemics that we're talking about in the 1800s and stuff, there was a really conscious effort to snuff out the Indigenous perspective, the reality of Indigenous people as nations and having any authority of our own. It was a common conscious effort, and that was a part of that effort. But today, in a time of when we're talking generally about reconciliation, about facing the reality, the fact that we're all here to stay, and that Indigenous people, as we see ourselves, are worthy of being respected. When this COVID-19 pandemic broke, the Haida leadership, this became the #1 priority for our people. Our government, the Council of the Haida Nation, immediately stepped in and took action to address this pandemic and laid out protocols and procedures for our people to keep our elders and each other safe. One of the first things they did is went to our neighboring communities, which over the years, over the last 50 years or so, we've built fairly constructive relationships where they accept that we're here as a nation, we're here to stay. So built on that, they laid out and discussed with them appropriate protocols we could share. Now, the Haida Nation had our own really high level of rules that the other communities came, 75% of the way. And we worked together on that. And then the province set in place their own protocols and rules, which came 75% of the island community's way. So we had this continuum of authorities, but at the top of it, it was the Haida Nation asserting, acting on our sovereignty, asserting our jurisdiction, protecting our people. And, I saw something in that. I saw some promise, like even though the provincial health officer, as push came to shove, and one of the measures the Haida leadership took is no visitors to Haida Gwaii. It was very controversial. That's a big economic implications to that. No visitors to Haida Gwaii. Of course, we have 3 ferries a week coming over from the mainland. So our own people went to the ferry terminal and politely asked potential visitors to inform them of this rule and ask them to honor it. Most of them did. There were some who didn't, but at one point early in this pandemic, I took a trip on that ferry back home to Haida Gwaii, and I was very encouraged to see. I went through an information line of my own people, greeted them and their talk. But when I got into the ferry parking lot, there was a provincial government representative in all their formality handing out a paper saying, we're asking you to honor the Haida Nation's protocol, to honor the Haida Nation's request. Like they didn't have, as a province, didn't have the authority to, they hadn't handed to their local people. They could have done it in Victoria, but to do progress. And we've got to find ways to work together. And one thing that I think we're gonna learn is, and I keep coming back to what Grandmother Whitecloud and Dr. Corshane keep reminding us. When we face these challenges, we need to, and we have many, this is one we have every day, and then we have climate change and biodiversity loss. When we face all these challenges, let's remember we need to be effective. We need to do them in the context of proper ceremony. We need to remind each other that means that we're all in this together. That kindness and compassion are the strongest forces amongst us. And if we move forward on that basis, what this experience is showing us is we can deal with this. you know, we've had a fair bit of success. The Haida Nation, the Heiltsuk, the Newhalk, and many others up and down the coast on taking this approach. But what it's going to take is stepping forward and standing in our power as nations and letting others know our perspective, our way of knowing, and our way of addressing these issues, and welcome them in. It's a long version answer to that very good question, Darren. Thank you.
I don't think that was too long an answer. I think that, you know, that greatly gives us some context and insight and some real world examples of how this is playing out. So the next question that came in is directed mostly towards Sabina, but I would you know, invite anyone who wants to comment on it as well. So we've heard a unified message during today's discussion of the importance and how critical it is that we adopt Indigenous medicine into our responses. So what parts of Western medicine do you think are worth keeping, and how can that be used? And then just to the panel more broadly, how do we go about making that happen? Is that a governance issue? Is that, you know, it's come up that it's a something that's really to the court of public opinion and, you know, getting the broader community and not just government. So if maybe everyone could speak to that once Sabina lets us know her perspective as a doctor.
Thanks, Darren. Well, I'm glad the conversation is going in this direction. And I think the first step is to engage Indigenous knowledge keepers and ask them that very question. I think we need to begin with the leadership of the Indigenous knowledge keepers. And I don't think they're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are parts of Western medicine that are very helpful to many of us, and I don't think that's going to be thrown out. But I think it's Indigenous people that have to be asked that question, and it's the knowledge keepers. They are in the best position to decide that in their leadership. The country has marginalized Indigenous people for so long that they aren't used to acknowledging the people with the proper respect for their leadership. When we set up a partnership relationship with Indigenous people in the spirit of working together, it is not the politicians, again, rather the knowledge keepers who are best positioned to bring this kind of knowledge to the table. It is the knowledge keepers who are the traditional leaders of their communities, the ones who traditionally have offered guidance to the chiefs, who were considered the chiefs were considered the spokespeople for the voices of the grandmothers and the male elders of the communities. And today, positioning Indigenous knowledge keepers in their rightful place of leadership and guidance will help them, not us, set the foundation for this country. With Western medicine, we could complement and add to the foundation that they set, but it doesn't work the other way around. Let me explain. Based on my experience working with the knowledge keepers, I've learned that the best approach forward is not to integrate into, like for Indigenous approaches, to be integrated into or indigenize current colonial systems. You can't integrate into Western medicine, these systems are very limited in their understanding and focus mainly on the body and somewhat on the mental aspects of wellness. But Indigenous knowledge is much more holistic. It's related to our relationship with all of life and addresses the body, the mind, the spirit, and the emotions. Knowledge keepers understand that our values, our good conduct, our relationship with the spirit, with nature, and our compliance with natural law is what guarantees good health, not only for the individual, but for their families, the community, the nation, and the whole planet. And you can't just sprinkle a little bit of Indigenousness into the Western system and hope that it will change. Many, like we were talking about before, many will say that the Western system takes a Band-Aid approach to healing symptoms using mainly drugs and surgery, which works in the ER when you have a broken bone, but doesn't work very well in preventing or addressing the root cause of chronic disease or mental illness. And so it's that foundation of good relations with all life that we need in order to be healthy. And then from that point on, you know, I think there are many, many knowledges, you know, Western medicine being one of them, that can be brought in to add to that body. If you look at China, for example, you go into, my understanding is you can access both Western and traditional Chinese medicine, and you don't have to choose one or the other. You could choose both. You could, you could have that experience. And I think there's a way of having, something like that here too, but that conversation needs to be led by the knowledge keepers.
Thank you, Sabina. So I'd like to actually sort of build upon that with Elder Corshane. So Sabina really speaks to, we have the immediate concern of COVID-19, but we need to take that step back and look at the holistic approaches to health and wellness. I'm hoping you could speak a little bit to that, stuff like how just impacts on diet and stuff like that, how that gives that broader health and wellness outcomes that are sort of shown over 10, 15, 20,000 years of survival to sort of prove themselves before Western science was brought into the conversation. Would you be able to speak a bit to that broader approach and sort of holistic health and wellness?
In experiencing the teachings, that are shared in the lodges of our people, I've always heard all the elders speak from a view acknowledging, the roots of life itself, the earth, the air, the water, or the body, the fire. And they speak that we, in order to be healthy, there needs to be balance with those four elements. So the elders, have tried to share life in a sense that we have to view life in a holistic way, but also the interconnectedness that we have with all of life and creation. And it's the values that set that relationship that we're to have with all these elements of life. The main focus that we have been making, in more recent times as we made the return back to our lodge is more the spiritual aspect of it, to reconnect again with that higher power, which we refer to as of higher intelligence. And as a people, we've always believed in that higher intelligence that, we refer to as the great mystery, because we don't have the mental capacity to be able to understand the fullness of the Great Spirit. The best that we can do to appreciate this Great Spirit is to feel it within our own spirit, to feel it within our own heart. So we made a very significant effort to try to remind, our people, particularly the young people, that a knowledge and understanding that we have evolved with as a people was almost destroyed. But, again, the strength of the Spirit is a testament, of the survival, of ourselves as a people. And when we talk about sharing, that understanding, which is very simple, taking a holistic approach, the Spirit, has to be in that understanding. And that Spirit is probably the most significant part of our being. And I've heard the knowledge keepers, the elders, the wise one saying and telling us that the most important element in our life is the Spirit. We have come from Spirit and manifested into this physical world. And when we have done our journey here in the human form, our spirit will return back to its source from where we have come from. But we come into this earth knowing that we have instructions on how to live and how to behave as human beings. And in every human being and in every life, there is a spirit that carries the identity of that living entity. For example, there's a spirit in an eagle that defines how that eagle should look, how it should be as an eagle. There's a spirit in a tree that defines, through the seed, the kind of tree that will grow. And we understand that, what will make things grow are those elements that were found, that represent the balance in life itself. We can't survive without the sun, which is really the element of fire. And if we look at what we have done to that element as human beings, we've really not understood the power of that fire itself. And this is one of the things we're trying to do and remind people of, that these original instructions that we have and the relationship that we have to have with the universe, the relationship that we have to have with the earth, you know, the relationship we have to have with the spirit of the sun, the spirit of the moon, the spirit of the stars, and on and on. But Indigenous people have a very deep understanding, you know, of relationship and how we should, you know, live and behave as human beings. And each of us have come into this world having the essence of the original instructions. Everyone has that. And what we have been able to do as a people is carry that blood memory of the original instructions, you know, how to be who we are as Indigenous people. Certainly as Indigenous people, you know, we were given a way of life, you know, that would give us understanding of our existence and purpose of why we have been allowed to come and live this human life. And prophecy had foretold that it would be in our homeland, that it would be the Indigenous people that would lead a movement of awakening, which I've talked about many, many times. And it is not a political leadership, but rather an ethical, moral leadership, you know, bringing out what we feel is a big part of the truth of, you know, of creation itself. Indigenous people, you know, have such a sacred relationship with the land, and we've been, you know, encouraged by the elders over and over again, you know, teach the people, you know, why we love the land so much as a people. And it's all about life. It's all about relationship. So we, you know, we continue to remain challenged, you know, in our homeland, you know, trying to share the voice that we have and the concerns that we have in terms of what we see is happening in our world. And for us, we cannot and will ever understand the real significance and meaning of the sacredness of life if we don't include the understanding of spirit itself, which is probably the most important element in our life. And working with people, you know, from the Western side, whether it be the scientists or the doctors or the intellectuals, academics, you know, taking a holistic approach, it recognizes that we have to work together, that there's uniqueness of value of knowledge, you know, that is carried by everyone. What the challenge is to try to find that spirit of respect between each other. And the big challenge for Indigenous people is to move beyond, you know, the misconception that many people have about us, you know, and they have to at some point come to realize that the Indigenous people have very, you know, something very, very significant to contribute to change the whole narrative in this country, the way that we deal, you know, with the land, the way we deal with each other as human beings. Well, you know, we were created in a unique way by our great creator, not to divide us or to separate us, but to create a, you know, a stronger understanding of uniqueness that is reflected in nature itself. No, there's not one tree that looks the same. The diversity, the uniqueness of creation is very evident in the beauty of the land. Why can't we see that as human beings, is that, you know, that we may be different, you know, but it creates beauty within the human family itself, that each of us have been given gifts and responsibility. And this is where the fulfillment of prophecy is very important in our homeland, that through the movement of the leadership of Indigenous people, you know, that uniqueness will come together at the center to create one understanding, one love, one truth, you know, one way of being able to live in the most simple way, honoring the earth itself and living by the natural laws that we have been given. The simple natural law: do not take more from the land that you need in order to survive. That, you know, because the moment that we do that, then what sets in is greed and selfishness in our beings if we take more than we need in order to, you know, to survive. And we can't continue to support institutions, you know, that are destroying the earth. And that falls within each of us, you know, because we are responsible for what we create and what we support. And I would hope that, you know, that there would be enough of us that would support a vision, you know, that would be totally respectful of life itself, and to create whatever we needed in order to survive out of the value of respect for the land itself. So that there's a lot that, you know, that Indigenous people can contribute. But the challenge right now is to position the elders in their rightful place of leadership, you know, to be recognized and to be valued, of the knowledge that they carry, because the knowledge that they carry is a knowledge that does not belong to them. It belongs to the people. It belongs to all of the human family to be able to hear the teaching, that have evolved through a people that have taken, tens of thousands of years. So we're doing things today that they may seem like small steps, but, be it that way, that those small steps hopefully will lead to great things, that we're going to be able to finally find, a rightful place and collectively taking care of the earth itself.
Thank you very much, Elder Corshane. So seeing as we have a few minutes left, there's two more questions. So the first one for Tom, just as someone who is a lawyer and sort of been trained in the Western knowledge systems and how evidence works and stuff in Western law, how can you maybe build on your experience of working with oral histories and sort of stuff that's passed down through the knowledge keepers, and how that can be brought into policy and into governance and into these kinds of systems in a respectful way?
Well, one of the first things I learned, and if you come from a academic tradition where you're researching archives and so on, is that traditional knowledge, the first thing you have to do is it doesn't have concrete corners. It doesn't have discrete corners. Frequently, in order for Indigenous knowledge to emerge, you have to hear the item that you're want to learn about discussed by different elders. And often what happens is that these elders are talking amongst each other, they'll come to a consensus about something. Now, this is particularly true when we're coming to evidence about something particular. But I'm imagining that this is the same thing is true when you come to evidence about medical things and about ways to proceed and so on, that to try to impose on Indigenous knowledge the same kind of discrete categories that we're used to doesn't work. It's bound to fail, because these are much more holistic discussions where the concepts have what I sometimes refer to as fuzzy edges, and that they overlap other areas. And so the critical thing is not to approach this in the same way that we would approach Western knowledge, but to ask for a repetition and for input from several sources, so that you see how within a community itself a consensus would have emerged.
Perfect. Thank you very much for those insights. And the last question we have is directed to Sabina. I was hoping you could maybe share a little bit about just specific practices that you've seen and sort of what the impacts of those have been, in Indigenous and from your Western medicine perspectives, and maybe share a little bit with us on that.
Sure, thank you for the question. The ceremonies such as the sacred fire, the sun dance, the rites of passage, naming ceremonies, to me hold incredible power and have incredible impact. They basically help you to feel your own spirit. I've witnessed the traditional drum sounded in a pipe ceremony touch the heart and bring hundreds of lawyers to tears at the Turtle Lodge. The rites of passage are hugely life-changing and transformational for so many. A young boy who reaches the age of 12 can go to the land to fast for 4 days and 4 nights and pray with all his heart for a dream or vision that will give him his purpose in life. Young women entering puberty are brought before the grandmothers, the aunties, the mothers for special teachings and ceremonies that help them understand their sacred role as a woman. The naming ceremony is very powerful. I saw a young guy in his late teens. He kept coming to see me in the clinic for anemia. He had low iron. He was always very quiet, and I didn't feel like pushing him to talk. I respected his space. And one day I saw him at the Turtle Lodge, and at our next appointment, I mentioned, "Hey, I saw you at the Turtle Lodge." All of a sudden, he opened up. He talked for 45 minutes straight about how he had received his spiritual name in ceremony at the Turtle Lodge and how much it meant to him. His name had something to do with being the lead wolf. And he gave me many examples about all his life, how he had been like the alpha wolf in his relationships with others. And then he said this, "You know, I tried to kill myself 7 times," he said. "I tried to hang myself. Each time I found a tree with a big branch and I tested the rope. 7 times the branch broke. Now that I have my name," he said, "I know that's behind me. And you know, that guy, he did well." This was about 4 or 5 years ago that this happened. He finished high school. He started renting a place in town. He found a woman and they had a child. And I still see him around and he still seems to be doing okay. And for him, I think the naming ceremony was very important in feeling confident in his own identity. Sitting at a sacred fire, which is a special prayer fire that is seen as a doorway to the spirit world, can have an incredible impact on healing. Spending time outside, sitting alone, connected to a sacred fire, you can share and give away all your hurts and pains to a higher power of spirit and receive guidance and direction through your own heart in answer to the questions you have about life. These ceremonies are integral, and they've helped me in my own life, and I've seen them help so many people just absolutely transform their health and really start them on a healing journey. So there's so much I can't even begin to explain, but it's just so powerful.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Sabina. So at this time, unfortunately, I'd like to acknowledge that we have lots more questions that we'd love to answer, but unfortunately don't have the time. We will be having future dialogues, and we will try and integrate some of your feedback and questions into those to make sure that your questions get answered as these dialogues build month after month. So with that, I'd just like to thank our speakers very much for their amazing words and for sharing all this knowledge with us. I know that it has definitely changed my perspective and understanding of how I look at this. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to our host today, Jackie Miller.
Thank you, Darren. Before I say a few concluding remarks, I'd like to just quickly ask if we could ask Elder Dr. Dave Corshane to close us off in ceremony, and then I'll end with a few quick important housekeeping notes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jackie. You know, I want to acknowledge our gratitude as a group, you know, for the presence of the spirit that was invoked at the beginning with Grandmother White Cloud. And it is in the spirit that I ask for continued guidance from the spirit for each of us, you know, to continue with the work that we are doing, you know, raising the level of concern that we have with what is happening in our world. And that spirit will guide us through our dreams and through the ceremonies that are conducted by our knowledge keepers across the land. They continue to act in gratitude, in ceremony, acknowledging the great love of the Creator and the great love of the land itself and the great love that comes from the ancestors and the spirit that sit in those 4 directions. And I just want to quickly maybe take a bit of time here to announce that we are going to be lighting sacred fires on the winter solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere. And it is a spiritual act honoring, you know, one of the elements of life that we call the fire. And it is in this time that we ask, you know, that those that are listening, that you can find it within yourself to take some time And if you can light a sacred fire, you know, because we want to light the sacred fire around the world, to bring light into this world through the sacred fire. And if you cannot, you know, light a sacred fire, then, you know, if you could light a candle and speak to the spirit and, you know, show your commitment to, you know, to wanting to be of support to the changes that are unfolding in front of us. So I just wanted to announce that. And I, again, thank all of you, you know, for your participation here and the ones that lead this process for your time and efforts, you know, that has allowed us to come forward and share the words of our heart and the words of love that we have for all of life. I just want to quickly conclude here by saying a prayer very quickly. Dan kianchi ejimini goes young. The Gamano Jabs Kama Gakwete boy when Gagi Kitwatek Chanishinabe, Migwatch Gandinamitek, Kenagego Jimis young, Aninchon Dadis young. When Mission took a gonna be a Quabanong Shawnam, Migabianok Sagetnam, Igibijin Chicago Aminanongum. Thank you. Migwatch, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. Always warms me to hear you speak in your language, Anishinaabe I believe. Thank you for that. And so thank you also to Grandmother White Cloud, who had to leave us a bit earlier, and to Miles, Tom, Sabina, and to Darren, and to our audience participants for sharing your time with us today. We'll be sending out a short survey after we finish up here, and we would really appreciate it if you could give us your feedback on that. And we'll soon be announcing our next programming plans for the next month. And we're organizing something very exciting around International Mountain Day that we look forward to sharing more with you about soon. And you can visit our website at waysofknowingforum.ca to be sure that you're signed up for updates, and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And last but not least, please donate to support our ability to bring you these dialogues. You can do so at waysofknowingforum.ca. Thank you. You can stop the recording now.
I believe that Sabina's recording still going.
Okay, so just a quick note to our speakers. I've sent